What's up, everybody? This is Battlefield Joe 97 here, giving you a double feature review of Assassin's Creed and Rogue One: A Star Wars Story. So let's start off with a bit of a stinker, and that's Assassin's Creed, directed by Justin Kurzel, and having Michael Fassbender, Jeremy Irons, and Maron Cutler, or whatever her last name is pronounced. And yeah, I was sort of a bit excited for Assassin's Creed of itself, because just like with Kingsglaive Final Fantasy 15, I thought it would break the mold of video game movies not being terrible. And yeah, just like with Kingsglaive Final Fantasy 15, Assassin's Creed did not break the mold. And to me, it finally got me to understand the fundamental problems with video game movies as a whole, but I'm getting ahead of myself. I at least wanted to say positives first, then negatives. So basically going back and forth out of positive and negatives for the movie itself. The positive being the Spanish Inquisition segments themselves. They are some of the best of the movie themselves. And the setting of the Spanish Inquisition is entirely in Spanish. There's no like one main character just saying the Spanish and then going into English, like say in the video games where like you're in Italy in the Renaissance, and then basically Ezio or his family members, they speak in Italian, and then they go back to saying English because the voice actors they're English based, but then sometimes they say Spanish and Italian. It's a convoluted mess when you think about it, but this movie in the Spanish Inquisition setting is entirely in Spanish, and it's refreshing as all hell to be able to have that, especially for an Assassin's Creed property. And the negatives would be the modern day segments themselves. They're kind of boring, and even though you wouldn't have an Assassin's Creed movie with at least some modern day segments, I just really didn't care for Michael Fassbender's character being Lynch, who is kind of an asshole, even more of an asshole than, say, Nolan North voicing Desmond Miles in the video games, or even the other forgettable main characters in the other Assassin's Creed games themselves. And to be honest here, at this point, I would have loved to have, like, say, an Assassin's Creed movie based entirely on the past. Like those shorts and even the small little movies that were, like, what, from Assassin's Creed 2 or Assassin's Creed Revelations. I think the one with, like, Ezio was an old man, that was a very good short. But anyhow, I'm getting ahead of myself. The positive being that I love the Spanish Inquisition setting. It's definitely really good and refreshing to at least have a setting that isn't spoken in English. The modern day segments are really boring. They segment halfway through the film. Another positive would be the fight choreography and the cinematography when it comes to fights. Even in the modern day segments, they're really good. They're well done, and they actually do capture the excitement of the video games when it comes to the combat. The stealth, on the other hand, going to the negative, is not really much stealth to go by. I mean, like Michael Fassbender's character, Lynch, he's in this facility by Asturgo themselves, so there's no way he could do sneaking, and even during the 1 ounce of sneaking of an assassin during the Spanish Inquisition parts with Callum, the ancestor of Lynch, it definitely feels a little bit low. Even an Assassin's Creed property would at least have some kind of stealth in the narrative themselves. And yeah, it's all right. I mean, if you're a fan of the video games and a fan of the brand in general, you're gonna be somewhat forgiving of the title, but overall, it's just exposition filled to the brim. Like if you're somebody who did not play the games, read the books, or anything of Assassin's Creed, it feels like the filmmakers or the writers, the script writers, just giving a lot of exposition. And for anybody who is a fan of the series and already knows the general concept of the Templars, the Assassins, the Apple of Eden, basically free will or control, three thought, etc., it feels like more exposition that we already know about, and it feels like a tiring thing. And that's the problem with, say, video game movies as a whole, like, say, Kingslave's Final Fantasy 15. They try to be standalone with, like, different characters that are not, like, say, Noctis from Final Fantasy 15, but it feels like even though they're standalone with new characters, they're still set in that same world. They still are stuck within that same world, and we get to know these characters and stuff like that. I mean, aside from, say, Marvel Studios, I've never seen anybody that actually has different characters within the same universe done well. And that's kind of sad because I was really hoping for Assassin's Creed, even to an extent, Kingsglaive Final Fantasy 15, to do that justice. But overall, it wasn't worth my time and effort to see Assassin's Creed, not in my local cinema, but actually going to Manhattan to pay close to $17 for an admission, a 2D screening, by the way, not 3D. So at least I got the chance of maybe lying down to see a 6 out of 10 movie. Definitely, you can get it on sale on Blu-ray when it eventually releases, but if you see a screening for this thing for like $15 or more, definitely not worth the recommendation. Even as a fan of the Assassin's Creed games as a whole, it's definitely not worth beyond $15 for a price admission. So anyhow, to get the stinger out of the way, let's talk about the film that I wanted to talk about last week, but I had my job and real life occupying me. And that, of course, is Rogue One, A Star Wars Story. Now, this was released last week and is still doing gangbusters in the box office, and it definitely is proving to Disney that anybody will watch Star Wars, regardless of maybe it's good or bad. Now, that doesn't mean that I dislike Rogue One in its entirety. I like Rogue One when it comes to the second and third act of the film, but the first act is really dragging about. It's really boring in certain parts of the first act, but once Jay Erso, Felicity Jones' character, and basically she meets the rebel. I forgot the guy's name. The rebel guy, and even K2SO. Things start to get a little bit good. And then when they go into the planet where they meet Donnie Yin's character and his friend, then it gets a little bit good. But then when it gets to the planet Scarif, that's when the second and third act gets really, really good, where it feels like the dog fights of Star Wars, like in the original trilogy, but in a more grounded kind of sense, which is really, really good and refreshing for a Star Wars film. To not be kind of CG fest like the prequels, and not as practical as the original trilogy, but at least having that grounded feel of Star Wars, and it definitely can feel that way when it comes to the Scarif setting. So the negative being that the first half is really slow and certain parts of it is boring, but then once the second and third act hits, when you meet Donnie Yin's character and then in the planet Scarif, that's when the film gets really, really good, exceptionally good as all hell. Another positive in the movie. A positive of the movie would be Darth Vader. Now, Darth Vader characterization is really, really good in this film, along with General Tarkin, General Tarkin, who is played by an actor, but is CG by Peter Cushing, which I don't know, like, if I was the only one that didn't felt that the effect was that bad as people make it out to be in the internet, because at first I was like, wow, this really looks fucking good. Either it's makeup or CGI, and then when finding out that it was CGI along with, say, spoilers, because it's already been a week, if you haven't seen Star Wars, that'd be something. Princess Leia actually appearing with a CGI looking Carrie Fisher. It looks really damn good. Like, it does relate to magic. It's doing exceptional work when it comes to CGI in modern day movies, especially them helping the Marvel Studios films when Disney acquired them in 2012. So it really is good. So in certain moments, the CGI is really good for the most part. Another negative would be the first half. I mean, another negative would be, of course, some of the characters not being as memorable, or the way that they don't really have that much of an impact. Which, I'll be honest here, the robot K2SO, who is voiced by Aaron Tuckins, that's the one where his death was emotional as all hell. Every other death, it kind of like, you did the good fight for the rebels, time for Princess Leia to get the Death Star plants, and essentially going into A New Hope Episode 4. Which, I gotta say, another positive for itself. The reshoots that this movie had, especially from its promotional teaser, is basically kind of shitty, at least compared to, say, Episode 7, The Force Awakens, where the marketing did not spoil anything, and for the most part the footage was actually in the movie instead of just being cut out from the film itself. So that's really something that Lucasfilm should not do for the next anthology film, and definitely should not do for Episode 8. That way, so they can keep the mystery and the hype when it comes to the next mainline Star Wars film and the next anthology film for the franchise itself. So anyhow, the final thoughts with Rogue One, A Star Wars Story, definitely a worthwhile investment to see in the theater. 3D, 2D, IMAX, whatever, just go see the movie itself. But definitely be prepared for the first act to be incredibly boring in certain parts of it. And definitely will be a day one purchase on Blu-ray. So anyhow, this is my double feature review on Assassin's Creed and Rogue One, a Star Wars story for the thoughts and feels of movies. If you like, favorite, comment, subscribe. This is Battlefield Joe 97. Catch you guys later. Have a Merry Christmas.